Genesis and the 25th chapter, verses 19 through 34. Hear now the word of the Lord. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of an Aramean from Paddan Aram, and the sister of Laban. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" And so she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the other will serve the younger." And when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, and so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, and so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I am famished." That is why he is also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I am about to die," Esau said. "What is the birthright to me anyway?" But Jacob saw and said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then he got up and left. And so Esau despised his birthright. Here ends the reading. Will you join me in prayer? Now, O Lord, take my lips and speak through them. Take our minds and think through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you. Amen. The stories of Genesis are best understood when they are stood as they originally would have been told, as an oral tradition, maybe told over campfires late at night, passed down through the generations long before they were ever written down. That's why the stories of Genesis are so engaging, why they have so much color and humor and relentless tragedy. And where we find ourselves today in Genesis is no different. Isaac was 40 when he married Rebekah, and now he's 60 when the next generation, the next fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham to become a great nation is on the scene. Can you imagine having twins when you're 60 years old? And right off the bat, we know that there is trouble to be had with these twins. As Rebekah is told by God, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. This is not how things are done. And when we are told they are not identical twins, the kind of twins that share a special language and bond, but rather the first brother is born and he's Esau and he's red and he's hairy. In fact, that's where his name comes from. That's what Esau means. How must it have felt to be known your whole life as the one who is hairy or rough? Right? That's what happens when they call him Esau. And the second brother born, Jacob, is always going to be clutching for power. He comes into the world gripping Esau's heel. In fact, that's what Jacob means. It means to be gripping the heel. It's also the root word for supplant or cheat. And so I wonder how it felt to come into the world as second and to be known as a cheat to begin with. And ultimately, Jacob lives up to that name. Jacob is a man who plots and schemes, always looking for the advantage to grasp at power, especially when it's power over his twin brother, Esau. Now, don't blink again or you might miss a decade. In one verse, we went from the twins being born to them being teenagers, each who are their parents' favorite. The favorite of Isaac is the one who's into hunting, the outdoors, the real man's man, if you will. And then the other is quiet and stays in the tent, maybe a mama's boy, if you will, Rebecca's favorite. And it reminds us almost of the story of Cain and Abel. These brothers seem to be destined for conflict from the very beginning. Not that anything is wrong with either one of these two types of beings, but we know, biblically speaking, it's a bad combination for siblings to be like this. It's a tragic combination. And in the big picture, this story of two nations and their distaste for each other leads to tragedy in the future. It might be like for us here in Illinois with the rivalry between the Cardinals and the Cubs. Or maybe a good college football rivalry where the legend is bigger than the reality. As long as you're on the winning side, it doesn't matter though, right? The punchline of our story today is that Esau sold his most valuable possession for a bowl of lentil stew, a bowl of the red stuff. And believe you me, I'm sure I always got a good roar of laughter every time it was told over the cackle of the bonfire, because I don't really know anyone that likes lentil stew that much in order to give up everything that they're supposed to receive, everything that's valuable in their life, to give up their birthright for it. Something that entitles you to an extra share of the inheritance. And I'm not sure that the tricking and the change of the birthright is really what this story is all about, though. The reality of this story is how dysfunctional it all is. Isaac thinks that things need to be fixed if they're going to be this really great nation that was promised to his father, and asks God for help with Rebecca's barrenness. Now, scientifically speaking, we know that it isn't always the woman's fault. And Rebecca receives a warning that these twins will be anything except ordinary twins. Jacob, coming out of the womb, grabs at Esau's heel, an image that implies he's always going to be trying to reach for more. That he will be the one to subvert the norm, the one to make sure that social customs that favor the firstborn are thrown out the window. And we all know that parents aren't supposed to have a favorite child, that they're supposed to love their kids equally. Siblings and twins fight like warring nations, not just over birthrights and their parents' love, but in fact because they are both fathers of two nations. The whole story is filled with dysfunction from the very beginning. Nothing is fine. Things are awful. Things are embarrassingly dysfunctional, and yet God still moves in their story. God still does great things with them. God is at work in this story, even though it highlights the struggle between Jacob and Esau. The highlights are the conflict within the family. Even amid the parents playing favorites, this lifelong sibling rivalry is at play. And God is right there with them in the midst of the brokenness and in the strife and in the family turmoil. All too often, we feel like we have to project this image to the world, and certainly to our neighbors, and maybe even our church family, that our family, our home, our life is normal, that everything is all right, everything is picture perfect, everything is ordinary, when it's far from that. But Jacob and Esau's story reminds us that it doesn't have to be picture perfect, that everything doesn't have to be fine. In fact, nothing has to be perfect, nothing has to be fine, nothing has to be resolved quickly. Conflict is viewed as something to be avoided or ignored or to sweep under the rug in our world. And yet, the story of Esau and Jacob challenges us to acknowledge that rivalry is part of life. It reminds us that dysfunction is part of being in the family of God. And even though we struggle, even though we fight, even though we have dysfunction in our families, God is still present and active, extending blessing to all people, be they the firstborn in the family or the youngest who's always grasping at power. And today's story also reminds us that God's promise is faithful even when we're unfaithful. Even when Esau sells out easily, God takes care of him. God is still generous with Esau, and we find out later in Genesis that he did become an ancestor of the multitudes and is blessed with abundance to meet the needs of his family. Even when Jacob lives up to his name and steals the birthright, when God has already promised that they're both going to be great nations, and he has to flee out of fear of his brother, God still takes care of him. For Jacob is eventually reconciled, and they're able to bury their father together. Even where the church has failed, we have been unfaithful, the power of God can redeem us if we recognize our own weakness, if we're willing to lead into the transforming mercifulness of God. Ultimately, I think the heart of all of these family stories we find in the book of Genesis, maybe even in the whole Bible, is that God does things through the lives of the strangest, the most awkward people who are, in fact, the most like us. God always seems to choose the least likely, an elderly couple without children to be the father and mother of the nations, an unwanted handmaid to cast her and her son out into the desert and become the head of a nation as well. Strong women and a 40-something-year-old bachelor who never met, uniting to be a family, to have twin brothers who have nothing to do but fight to become great nations that eventually become one nation together. God, it seems, continues to choose those whom we might call the B team, the ones who don't even have the illusion of having their acts together in the first place. Deep down, we know that God chooses people just like us, and that's the good news. The good news isn't that God finally found one healthy family to save the world. The good news is that God has never had one of them to begin with. The good news is that God, from Genesis onward, works through jealous siblings, anxious parents, broken marriages, wandering children, and imperfect people. That's the only kind of people that God has ever worked with, which means our hope has never rested on being perfect from the beginning. Our hope is already rested on having faithfulness in God that uses people just like us. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have everything figured out before God can visit us, bless us, and use us for the glory of the nations. If God can work through the dysfunctional house of Isaac, Esau, and Jacob, can you just imagine what God can do with us? If you are interested in placing your membership here at First Christian Church of Creve Coeur, I invite you to talk to Jim after worship. Let us stand and sing our closing hymn, Guide Me Thou, Great Jehovah, number 622.
One
into the world with God's joy. Tell of the good news of God's abundant and lavish love for all of creation. Go and be a witness to all of the miraculous possibilities of hope and peace in the world. Amen.